The Town Star competition happening on August 26, 2025 will feature something different, a garage sale meta. This is a new version of an anything goes meta where a couple of items are boosted in stars. The star boosts for this competition are vanilla scented candle from 835 to 97,000, mead from 2,545 to 136,000, and supply box from 775 to 86,000. For this build showcase, I will be doing supply box as I believe it is the best option to make without any NFTs, and even for most people with good NFTs, supply box will likely still be the best option. The craft requirements for supply box are 2 ceramic bowl, 2 wax, and 1 wooden box. It is crafted in the pottery shop with a craft time of 1 minute and stored in the warehouse. The trade time for this competition is 60 seconds with a 1 gasoline cost per trade. The starting layout provided for this competition is a plains biome with a river on the east side. This competition does reintroduce spoiled soil tiles, which each cost 25,000 to remove, and you can also use gems to clear them, but nobody will be doing that. All of this considered, this is still cheaper clear than a forest biome would be. There are no cash boosts for this competition. The rewards for this competition are the standard Gala rewards plus an NFT known as a Hasty Bakery Blueprint for reaching the top 1200 placements in the leaderboard by the time the competition ends. The Hasty Bakery Blueprint will increase the movement speed of the baker from the bakery. The higher the rarity, the higher the boost. Rewards are usually distributed directly to your account within 5 days. This is my no NFT required supply box design. I'm going to show you how well it's performing. It's only been running for about an hour now. I did have this running earlier for like 8 or 9 hours, then the game disconnected, but you'll see some footage of the production monitor after it ran for like 5 or 6 hours. Anyways, this does 146 supply box per hour. I know right now it shows 145. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. You can see the wax rate is like 293. Each supply box requires 2 wax, so you could kind of get the 146 supply box per hour rate from that. I'm going to scroll through the production monitor so you can see the production rates of everything here. I did get the ceramic bowl rate to 630 per hour, which is pretty interesting. Now this video will be a little bit different. Instead of breaking down the crafting process for each item, I am going to show you how I designed this using the planner tool that I recently created called the Town Star Playbook Planner. Now that tool is only available for supporters, that is my supporters on YouTube as a member or on Patreon. For the time being, I should mention, especially since it's like in early access, there's still a lot of things that I would like to improve on it, and it just takes a lot of time and a lot of messing with it. So it's like 10 minutes of footage. I'm going to let that play out in its entirety, and then I will come back with some finishing statements about this design or improvements that could be made. I'm going to show you how I plan this design using the Town Star Playbook Planner. This will be a little bit of a showcase on how to use the planner, but not an exact guide on how to use it. So this footage will be sped up 3 times, and I do a little bit of cuts to take off places where I didn't really do anything or I was waiting a little bit. So the first thing I did was set up where I'm going to have the gasoline rush, and usually that's also where I have lumber mills making lumber, and of course I'm gonna need tree farms making wood for the lumber and a couple of loggers. So by having all that down, as well as the lumber yard, the production predictions already kicking in, saying that I'm going to be making some wood and some lumber. Now I figured I was going to need a lot more wood. That's why I was placing down some ponds and copy pasting those lines of tree farms. Now one mistake I did make planning this out, and you know, mistakes happen when you're planning stuff out and then you realize them when you're actually making the design in game. But one mistake I made was that I forgot to put a pond on the southeast side for the other tree farms. So some of those tree farms don't even have 5 water. I don't realize it until basically the end whenever I'm making those final adjustments. After I have all that down, I start making the first setup with the nuclear power and the pottery shops to make ceramic bowls, and then I basically copy that setup over again so I can have twice as many pottery shops. And then eventually I add a couple of clay fields and some warehouses to store the ceramic bowls, and then the production prediction kicks in saying that I have everything I need to make ceramic bowls because I'm making clay lumps and I have passive energy and passive water drums for the pottery shops. Now I add a lot more loggers, and I should mention that the production prediction is really not accurate for raw resources like wood and clay lumps. So I already know that I'll need several more clay fields and tree farms, like I said, to make this work. And around here is when I put down the clover fields and the beehives so I can start making wax, and that shows up in the production prediction. Well, it shows up after I add the beekeepers, of course, because I would need the beekeepers to pick up the wax and store it in the warehouse. And before I put down the pottery shops making the supply boxes, I also need to put down lumber mills making wooden boxes, so that's what I'm doing. And I was thinking of putting some lumber mills right there for the wooden boxes, but then I realized, wait, there's no dirty in that spot, so I could just put down more pottery shops making ceramic bowls in those spots. And after I set up the wooden box production is when I put down a couple of pottery shops making supply boxes. And finally, the production prediction is predicting that supply boxes can be made because I have everything required for it. Now I do want more ceramic bowls, so I do end up doing a third nuclear power on the north, and that's going to allow me to have more passive energy to have more pottery shops making ceramic bowls. And I was kind of overestimating how many pottery shops I would be able to handle here, so eventually I do add like another pond and water pump and more pottery shops, even getting rid of some of the roads, which I usually don't do in these build showcases. And in the end, I end up reverting that change. You'll see what I mean. Some of the tools I use throughout this is hotkeys available in the planner, such as Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. I use the arrow keys to move the selection. I use WASD to set door positions quickly, and I can use the H key to hide the sidebars. And while the calculator is hidden, it does run more smoothly because it's not running the production prediction after every single change. Because if you do have that production prediction showing on the left of the screen, it will be much more laggy. I will have a dedicated video actually talking about everything you can do in the Town Star Playbook Planner, hopefully later next week. And then I add a couple more warehouses so that the clay lumps and the ceramic bowls can be deposited at the closest warehouse, of course. Same thing with the wooden boxes. And I'm just checking how much passive energy I have here so that I can move stuff around so that the pottery shops still have enough passive energy in that spot. And right here I was messing around with, like, could I change out one of these lumber mills from making lumber to wooden boxes? But in reality, the lumber mill craft times or predictions for the lumber mills right now is not very accurate. After making this design, I got some ideas on how I could possibly make it more accurate. But in the end, I do end up having 4 lumber mills making lumber because that's the only way I was going to get enough lumber for all of this. And just to be on the safe side, I also add more beekeepers. I add one more to this idea, but in the end, I end up having yet another beekeeper just to make sure I have enough beekeepers to do all the work. Around here is when I got rid of some of those clay fields to put down more wild clovers for those 2 extra beehives, but I do end up putting up more clay fields on the northeast in between the ponds. And around here I am just adding the rest of the clay fields and adjusting some of the door positions, then eventually adding 2 more pottery shops, which I get rid of in the end after I build this out. Don't really have much to comment about in this part, so I just let it play out for half a minute. And as I mentioned before, the Town Star Playbook Planner is only going to be available to my YouTube members or Patreon supporters for the time being. And if you are supporting me on YouTube or Patreon, you can send me a direct message on Discord and I will send you an access key to access the planner. And since the production predictions seemed to think that I needed more lumber mills making wooden boxes, I found a spot to have another lumber mill making wooden boxes, and I had to move the forklift over to where I had one of the logger houses. And in reality, I didn't need another forklift. I ended up needing to have 3 forklifts to make sure that they were always picking up crude oil and clay lumps in a good amount of time. It is true you could just have the pottery shops do all the picking up of the clay lumps, but that would actually lead to a lower production rate for your ceramic bowls because it's not as efficient to do. And after that initial idea, I started building it out. I started making adjustments based on the production rates that I was seeing, and this is what I got to 146 supply box per hour. I did make a change somewhere in between here where I added more oil pumps because this was running for 4 hours and I still had like 20 something gasoline, but just to make sure I had enough gasoline, I wanted to add 2 more oil pumps. So here in the end is when I do those final adjustments. I add that pond I needed for those tree farms. I delete some of the tree farms from the northeast side, add more roads, add more logger houses, more clay fields, and move some buildings around, like getting rid of 3 of the pottery shops so I can have a nice clean roads on the north side. And then eventually I change out one of the lumber mills for another one making lumber. Like I said, I have 4 lumber mills making lumber, and I also move 2 forklifts up. I add 1 more forklift, making it 3 forklifts, and then I add 2 more oil pumps. Now the production prediction predicts that this makes about 133 supply boxes, and like I said, that's because the lumber mills is not very accurate. It's predicting a whole lot more lumber and not enough wooden box. It's very difficult to get some of these predictions correct, so that definitely will be something I'm going to take a look at, is the lumber mill craft times or travel time predictions, to see if I can get that more accurate. But the prediction for the ceramic bowl rate was pretty much correct, 630 per hour with this setup, I believe is what I was making here. I know that the wax was not accurate, and that's kind of what led to the lower production prediction on the supply box, because in reality the wax was like 295 per hour or something like that, and I did have about 150 wooden boxes per hour, so I was making just enough wooden boxes for my goal here. And at the very end here, I just show you the totals. It's about a $40 million build cost, and I show you what the craft time colors looks like, so you can see everything is on a green craft timer. Okay, now the last things I'll mention about this no NFT required supply box design. First of all, the auto sell, you do want to have items here with an auto sell quantity of 12. That way you have at least 2 items to spare. The clay lumps, I have that at 20. You always wanted to have additional clay lumps to spare on your warehouse so that the pottery shop workers can quickly pick them up instead of having to go all the way to the clay field to pick the clay lumps up, which is not as efficient. And then of course, supply box, you would just set that at 10. You don't have to sell any lumber or wood or petroleum in this design. So it would actually be a good idea to set wood on auto sell in case you're overproducing too much of it. Perhaps that could also mean that you're just not making enough lumber, but yes, I would recommend putting wood on auto trade just in case. Now, as you saw, it does 146 per hour. It actually does kind of close to 147 per hour, but this could be improved to 153 per hour, or just about, based on the wooden box rate and the ceramic bowl rate, but it needs to make more wax. I tried to get the wax over 300 per hour. I probably still could have if I spent more time tweaking it, but I stopped it on here. I thought it was a good stopping point. What you could potentially do is either add another beehive and maybe that'll make more wax, or move the beehives closer to the roads, maybe right here, and then have the clover fields over here. That way the beekeepers can get to them more quickly, and that would help out your wax production rate. And yeah, that would be my idea to improve the wax rates, therefore improve the supply box rate. I do believe there's already enough pottery shops here making supply boxes. I don't think that's what the issue is gonna be. And I am using 3 nuclear power, of course. That's why this design is expensive, 40 million as I mentioned before, and that doesn't even include the cost of the steel mill and clearing the spoiled soil and the trees and the rocks. Now I'm gonna assume that that you already know how to make nuclear power, but if you don't, I already have a video dedicated to explaining how to build the nuclear power. And since there's no cash boost for this competition, most people are going to go back on relying on Gold Rush, which is a very good way to get all the cash that you need to finish this design. And if for some reason you've never done a Gold Rush either, I do have a video dedicated to doing a Gold Rush. And of course, I will be creating a file for the visualizer using townstarplanner.online that I will be sharing on my Discord with everyone. And I believe that's everything for this build showcase, a little bit different like I said, but hopefully you still found it very helpful and informative. Please leave a like on the video, leave a comment, let me know what you thought. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. And if you would like to support the channel, you can find links in the description on how to do so. As always, I appreciate your support and thank you for watching.